Get out. We want our space. Her words sliced through me like a knife. My own daughter-in-law, in the house I still owned. My son, my only child, just stood there, saying nothing. That moment changed everything. Sometimes betrayal comes from those closest to us. This is my story of deception, heartbreak, and finding the courage to reclaim my life at 78. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I found it while cleaning Harold's desk, divorce papers Michael had left behind after our lunch. My son hadn't mentioned his failing marriage. Yet there it was, evidence of his crumbling world. I stared at my reflection in the antique mirror Harold had given me on our 40th anniversary, noting how the past year had etched deeper lines around my eyes. "Mom, sorry I'm late," Michael said, rushing through the front door of my Victorian home in Westbrook. At 52, his hairline had receded like Harold's, but his eyes still had that boyish sparkle. Work was insane today. "It's fine, dear. Lunch is still warm." I hugged him, hiding what I knew. If he wanted to tell me, he would. Over chicken pot pie, his favorite since childhood, Michael finally broke. "Mom, Vanessa and I have been seeing each other for a few months now." I nearly choked on my water. "Catherine's daughter? Vanessa Taylor? I know it seems sudden after the divorce, but we reconnected at that charity event last year." His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since his college days. "She's changed, Mom." I remembered Vanessa as a child, beautiful but entitled, always demanding attention. Catherine had always made excuses for her daughter's behavior. Now in her late 40s, Vanessa had been through 2 marriages already. "I'm happy if you're happy," I lied, because that's what mothers do. 3 months later, they were engaged. 6 months after that, I found myself hosting their engagement dinner in my dining room, watching Vanessa parade around my home, eyeing my antiques like items on an auction block. "This chandelier must be worth a fortune," she commented, staring up at the crystal fixture Harold had installed himself. "It's not about the value," I replied. "It's about the memories." After dinner, Michael pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to tell you something. We've been looking at apartments, but with the economy and my investments tanking..." He couldn't meet my eyes. "What is it, Michael?" "We're struggling financially. I lost almost everything in that tech crash." Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared, wrapping herself around my son's arm. "Your mother doesn't need to worry about our problems." That night, as I lay in bed thinking about Michael's situation, I made a decision that would change everything. I owned several investment properties Harold and I had purchased during his successful career as a corporate attorney. The colonial house on Maple Street was sitting empty. The next morning, I called Michael. "I have a solution for your housing situation," I said. "The colonial on Maple Street. You and Vanessa can live there as long as you need." His voice caught. "Mom, we couldn't..." "I insist. The property is just sitting there." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "I'll keep it in my name since it's part of my retirement plan, but it's yours to live in." When we met at the property later that day, I handed Michael the keys. Vanessa walked through the house, her perfectly manicured finger tracing the original woodwork. "It's old-fashioned," she said with a thin smile, "but we can work with it." Michael embraced me tightly. "Thank you, Mom. We won't forget this." As I drove home, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. I chalked it up to empty nest syndrome, even though my son had moved out decades ago. I had no idea that I had just handed over the keys to what would become my prison of guilt, manipulation, and betrayal. It started with unanswered phone calls. I'd leave messages for Michael, and days would pass before he'd return them. When I'd invite them for Sunday dinner, a tradition in our family for decades, there was always an excuse. Work commitments, previous engagements, Vanessa feeling under the weather. I kept a small leather-bound journal, a habit I'd developed during my years as a school principal. Tuesday, called Michael about dinner this weekend. Vanessa answered, said they were busy. Thursday, left another message. No response yet. I wasn't keeping score. I was trying to convince myself I wasn't imagining the growing distance. One Wednesday afternoon, I prepared Michael's favorite lasagna and drove to their house. My house, technically. I rang the doorbell, balanced the still warm dish in my hands, and waited. Vanessa answered, her smile faltering when she saw me standing there. "Eleanor, this is unexpected." She opened the door reluctantly. "I thought you might enjoy a home-cooked meal," I said, stepping inside. The house looked different. The antique side table that had been in the entryway was gone. replaced by a sleek modern console that didn't fit the colonial architecture. Michael emerged from his home office, surprise evident on his face. "Mom, we weren't expecting you. I was in the neighborhood and thought you might like some lasagna." My voice sounded unnaturally cheerful even to my own ears. "That's thoughtful," Vanessa said, taking the dish from my hands with a forced smile. "We actually just ordered takeout, but we can save this for tomorrow." I followed them into the kitchen. Noticing more changes, the vintage cabinet pulls had been replaced with stainless steel handles, and the warm cream walls were now stark white. While Michael excused himself to finish an email, I heard Vanessa in the hallway, her whispered words carrying into the kitchen. "I can't believe she just showed up." "Again, can't we just tell her to call before coming over? It's like we have no privacy anymore." The wooden spoon I was using to stir my tea clattered against the porcelain cup. I set it down carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady. Michael's hushed response. "She's just being helpful. You know how she is. It's suffocating." "Michael, your mother needs to understand boundaries." I quietly gathered my purse and car keys. When they returned to the kitchen, I was already headed for the door. "I should get going," I said, avoiding their eyes. "Enjoy the lasagna." "Mom, you don't have to leave," Michael said, but the relief in his voice was unmistakable. On the drive home, tears blurred my vision. I'd agreed they needed their space, their privacy as newlyweds, but I never expected to be treated like an intruder in a house I owned, bringing food I had lovingly prepared. That evening, I sat alone at my dining table pushing food around my plate. The phone rang. Catherine, Vanessa's mother and my friend of 5 decades. "Eleanor, how are you? We haven't spoken in weeks." I considered telling her about what I'd overheard, but loyalty to Michael stopped me. "I'm fine, just adjusting to Michael being married again." "Vanessa seems so happy," Catherine gushed. "She says the house is absolutely perfect." I nodded, forgetting she couldn't see me. "Yes, it's a lovely home." After hanging up, I added a new entry to my journal. "Remember, they need their space. Call first next time." But the words felt like a surrender to something I couldn't quite name yet. Spring turned to summer, and with it, my relationship with Michael continued to wither like unwatered flowers. Our weekly phone calls became monthly. His visits, once reliable as clockwork, became rare events to be celebrated. When we did get together, I noticed a disturbing pattern. Vanessa dominated every conversation, often cutting me off mid-sentence. "So, I've been volunteering at the literacy center downtown," I began during one of our rare meals together. "Speaking of downtown," Vanessa interrupted, "Michael and I saw the most amazing modern art exhibition last weekend. You probably wouldn't have enjoyed it, Eleanor. Very avant-garde." Michael nodded, avoiding my eyes. The son who once asked for my opinion on everything from his college essays to his career choices now seemed unable to form independent thoughts in his wife's presence. November brought Thanksgiving, and I spent days preparing. I polished the silver that had been in Harold's family for generations, set the table with my best china, and cooked all of Michael's favorites. They arrived an hour late. Vanessa swept in wearing a designer outfit that seemed excessive for a family dinner, her eyes scanning my home critically. "This place is exactly the same," she said, running a finger along the mahogany sideboard. "Don't you ever think about updating, Eleanor? All these antiques make it feel like a museum." I forced a smile. I find comfort in familiar things. During dinner, Vanessa dominated the conversation with stories about their social circle, people I'd never met and events I hadn't been invited to. As I served pumpkin pie, Harold's recipe, Vanessa set down her fork and fixed me with a direct stare. "Frankly, Eleanor, a house this size for a person of your age, it seems dangerous and wasteful." The room fell silent. Even the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to hold its breath. "I manage just fine," I replied, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my throat. "There are some lovely retirement communities in Lexington," she continued. "Very upscale. You'd be around people your own age. I'm not ready for that yet." "Well, no one is ever ready to admit they're getting older." She laughed as if she'd said something witty. "But really, what are you going to do with all these antiques and heirlooms?" "I've always planned to pass them down to Michael," I said, looking at my son, who suddenly became very interested in his pie. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. "We don't need to clutter our space with old things. They probably aren't worth much anyway." Michael cleared his throat, but said nothing to defend the family treasures he once admired, or the mother who had preserved them for him. After they left, I noticed my grandmother's diamond brooch was missing from the display cabinet in the living room. It had been there that morning when I dusted. I searched everywhere, telling myself I must have misplaced it, refusing to consider the alternative. That night I wrote in my journal, "Missing diamond brooch, also missing, the son who would have once helped me search for it." My 79th birthday dawned bright and clear. I made coffee and checked my phone, expecting at least a message from Michael. Nothing. By noon, I'd received calls from several friends, including Patricia, my former colleague, but silence from my only child. He's probably planning something special, I told myself, remembering how Michael had always made a fuss over my birthdays. Even after Harold died, my son had maintained our family traditions, bringing cake and insisting we celebrate. By evening, still nothing. Determination overtook disappointment. I baked my own birthday cake, lemon with buttercream frosting, just as Harold used to make for me, and dressed in my favorite blue dress. I wasn't going to let Michael's forgetfulness ruin my day. I drove to their house, my house, with the cake on the passenger seat. As I turned onto Maple Street, I noticed several cars parked outside. Lights blazed from every window, and I could hear music playing. Confused, I approached the front door and rang the bell. The sound of laughter abruptly stopped. Footsteps approached, and Michael opened the door, his expression changing from festive to horrified in an instant. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I stood frozen, the cake suddenly heavy in my hands. Behind him, I could see a dining room table set for a dinner party, champagne glasses glinting under the chandelier. "It's my birthday," I said, the words sounding small and pathetic. Vanessa appeared beside him, glass in hand. "Eleanor, what a surprise!" Her voice was artificially bright. "Oh dear, is it your birthday? We had no idea." Through the doorway, I spotted Catherine among the guests, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and pity. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away. "We're celebrating Michael's promotion," Vanessa continued. "If only you'd called first, we could have included you in our plans." Michael at least had the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, I'm so sorry." With everything happening at work, I completely forgot. I handed him the cake, forcing my lips into a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "It's nothing. Enjoy your celebration. Congratulations on the promotion." "Won't you come in?" Michael asked, though his tone suggested he hoped I'd decline. No, I don't want to intrude on your party. I just thought—" My voice trailed off. What had I thought? That my son would remember the day of my birth? That I mattered enough to merit a phone call? "Another time, then," Vanessa said, already closing the door. "Happy birthday, Eleanor." I drove home carefully, tears blurring the road ahead. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, an old woman alone on her birthday. Harold would have been devastated to see me like this, my strong, principled husband who had always taught Michael about respect and family. At home, I sat in darkness, no candles to blow out, no wishes to make. My phone dinged with a text message from Michael. "So sorry about tonight, Mom. Let's have dinner next week to celebrate your birthday. Love you." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today I turned 79. Today I also realized that in my son's new life, there is no room for his mother." The tears finally came then. Not quiet and dignified, but wrenching sobs that left me gasping. I cried for the little boy who once made me birthday cards with crayon hearts, for the young man who drove 4 hours from college just to surprise me on my birthday, and for the middle-aged stranger who had forgotten me entirely. 2 months crawled by. Following Vanessa's protocol, I called ahead to schedule a visit, clutching the health insurance documents Michael had requested. Each ring of the phone tightened the knot in my stomach. "Eleanor," Vanessa answered, her voice cool and professional. "Yes, tomorrow at 2 would be fine." The next day, I arrived precisely on time, documents neatly organized in my leather portfolio, a gift from Harold on our 30th anniversary. The Colonial's driveway was cluttered with construction trucks, and a dumpster sat on what had once been my carefully tended front lawn. I navigated around a pile of debris to reach the front door, which stood ajar. Inside, the once elegant entryway was in shambles. Plastic sheets hung from doorways, and the air was thick with plaster dust. "Hello?" I called out, stepping carefully over power cords. Michael emerged from the living room, his dress shirt incongruous amid the chaos. "Mom, thanks for bringing those papers." "What's happening here?" I asked, trying to keep the alarm from my voice. Just some renovations, he said vaguely. Vanessa's in the back. Come on through. I followed him through the house, my heart sinking with each new discovery. The original hardwood floors were being covered with modern tile. The crown molding Harold and I had painstakingly restored was gone, but it was the bay window that stopped me in my tracks. Workers were removing the stained glass panels, vibrant blues and ambers that had cast jewel-toned light across the room for over a century. Michael, what are they doing with the stained glass? My voice came out as a whisper. Before he could answer, Vanessa appeared, wearing a hard hat like a fashion accessory. Eleanor, perfect timing. What do you think of our modernization project? I struggled to find words that wouldn't betray my horror. It's quite a change. We're bringing this old place into the 21st century, she said proudly. Those dated stained glass windows are the first to go. But those windows are what made Harold and I fall in love with this house, I said, watching as a worker carelessly placed one of the priceless panels against a wall. They're irreplaceable architectural elements. The house is listed in the historic register because of features like that. Vanessa's smile hardened. You said we could live here as we wanted. I said you could live here, I corrected, finding my voice. Not destroy irreparable historic features. Is there a problem? A man in a suit approached, clipboard in hand. No problem, Vanessa said quickly. My mother-in-law is just surprised by the changes. Actually, I said, straightening my shoulders, I'm wondering if you've obtained the proper permits for altering a historically protected property. The contractor looked confused. Mrs. Wilson, I was told you approved all these changes. I did no such thing, I replied, turning to Michael, who suddenly seemed intensely interested in his shoes. Vanessa's face flushed red. You gave us this house. I allowed you to live in this house, I clarified. The deed remains in my name, which means legally you need my approval for structural changes. That's it, Vanessa exploded, her carefully cultivated poise vanishing. We always knew there were strings attached. This is exactly why we never invite you over. Get out. We want our space. The contractor backed away, clearly uncomfortable. Michael finally looked up, not at Vanessa, but at me. I think it's better if you go, Mom, he said quietly. We'll talk later. I handed him the insurance documents and walked out, my legs trembling with each step. In my car, I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from rage, pure, cleansing anger. As I gripped the steering wheel, a clarity I hadn't felt in months washed over me. This wasn't about a house or stained glass windows. This was about respect, about boundaries that had been trampled for too long. I started the engine, my decision already made. The time for turning the other cheek was over. Eleanor, you need to check your financial statements, Patricia said, passing me a cup of tea. We sat in her sunlit kitchen, the one place I felt safe enough to break down completely. After leaving Michael and Vanessa's, I'd driven straight to Patricia's. My friend of 40 years, former colleague and retired attorney, listened without interruption as I recounted everything. The growing distance, the birthday debacle, and finally, the confrontation over the house renovations. This isn't just about them being rude, Patricia continued, her lawyer's mind already calculating angles I hadn't considered. Something doesn't add up. The renovation costs for what you described would be astronomical. Where is that money coming from if Michael claimed financial difficulties? The question hung in the air between us, unthinkable, yet demanding consideration. The next morning, I called Mr. Reynolds, my accountant since Harold's death. His response to my request for a meeting was immediate and concerning. I've been trying to reach you for months, Mrs. Wilson. 2 hours later, I sat across from him in his office as he spread papers across his desk. We've received several alerts about unusual activity, he explained, pointing to highlighted transactions. I sent multiple notices to your home address. When you didn't respond, I assumed they were errors, and you'd confirmed that directly with the banks. My stomach clenched. I never received any notices. He nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. What followed was a methodical uncovering of horror. Credit cards I'd never applied for opened in my name. Small withdrawals, $200 here, $500 there, from various accounts over 18 months, totaling more than $65,000. The pattern is telling, Mr. Reynolds said, showing me a calendar where he'd mapped the transactions. Most withdrawals occur within 24 hours of when your son and his wife visit you. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's impossible. There's more, he said reluctantly. I took the liberty of consulting with a private investigator I trust. He slid another folder toward me. He found these among your personal papers when he checked your home office yesterday. Inside were partially completed property transfer documents with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. I never signed these, I whispered, staring at the careful forgery. The investigator believed you'd want to know immediately. Mr. Reynolds' voice was gentle but firm. Do you recall your son asking you to sign anything recently? A memory surfaced. Michael at my kitchen table 3 weeks earlier, a stack of papers between us. These are just insurance forms, Mom. Sign where I've marked while I take this call. I'd signed without reading, distracted by an urgent call from Catherine about her husband's health. What do I do? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. First, we secure your assets, Mr. Reynolds said decisively. Then we document everything. You'll need to decide if you want to pursue criminal charges. Criminal charges. Against my only child. The words seemed to belong to someone else's nightmare. As Mr. Reynolds outlined security measures, a thought surfaced through my shock. Harold would be heartbroken, but not surprised. He'd always worried about Michael's lack of financial discipline, his tendency to be influenced by stronger personalities. One more thing, Mr. Reynolds added, closing the folders. The investigator noticed your mail appears to have been tampered with. I suggest we redirect all your financial communications to a P.O. box immediately. On the drive home, I passed the Colonial on Maple Street. My property, my investment, my mistake. The construction trucks were still there, dismantling history piece by piece, just as Michael and Vanessa had been dismantling me. That night, I didn't write in my journal. Instead, I opened my safe and removed Harold's pocket watch, the one possession he'd asked me to keep close. Inside the case was his favorite quote, inscribed in his careful handwriting, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." For the first time in months, I slept without tears. The market is surprisingly strong right now, Richard, my real estate broker, explained as we sat in his office. Properties in historical districts are particularly desirable. 3 days had passed since my meeting with Mr. Reynolds. 3 days of careful planning, of quiet rage, of rediscovering my backbone, the one I'd worn proudly during 30 years as a school principal, but had somehow misplaced in widowhood. I want a discreet sale, I explained. Private listings only, serious buyers. Richard nodded, making notes. And the current occupants? My lawyer will handle the notification requirements. Mr. Goldstein had been clear. As the legal owner with no formal rental agreement in place, I needed to notify the occupants of my intent to sell, but I wasn't obligated to offer them first refusal or detailed timelines. May I ask what prompted this decision? Richard's eyes were kind behind his glasses. We'd known each other since he sold Harold and me our Victorian home decades ago. Let's just say I'm simplifying my investment portfolio, I replied, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. That afternoon, I made 2 more appointments. One with the bank to secure new accounts that only I could access, and another with an art teacher. If I was rebuilding my life at 79, I might as well explore the watercolor painting I'd always wanted to try. The formal notification letter to Michael and Vanessa went out the next day, certified mail with signature required. Exactly as Mr. Goldstein had advised. The language was straightforward. This letter serves as official notification that the property at 247 Maple Street may be listed for sale. Further information will be provided as it becomes available. I imagined Vanessa's face when she opened that envelope. The thought brought me no joy, only a grim satisfaction that I was finally taking action. Meanwhile, the financial specialist hired by Mr. Reynolds documented each unauthorized transaction, building a case that could be presented to authorities if needed. The evidence was overwhelming. My identity had been used to open 3 credit cards. My accounts had been systematically drained in small increments. My mail had been intercepted to hide the evidence. All roads led to Michael and Vanessa. That Friday, I attended my first watercolor class at the community center. Surrounded by fellow seniors, I dipped a brush into azure blue and made my first tentative stroke across the paper. The color bloomed and spread, unpredictable and beautiful. "That's it," encouraged the instructor, a gentle woman with silver hair. "Don't try to control it completely. Water has its own ideas." I thought about how I'd tried to control everything after Harold died. My grief, my loneliness, my fear of being a burden to Michael. How that control had become a kind of surrender to Vanessa's manipulations. Michael's distance. No more. That evening, Patricia called. "How are you holding up?" "I'm painting," I said, surprising both of us with a small laugh. "Terribly, but I'm painting." "Eleanor Wilson, artist. I like it." Her tone shifted. "Any response to the letter?" "Not yet." "Brace yourself," she warned. "People like Vanessa don't give up easily." Patricia was right. The next morning, my phone rang. Catherine's number. "Eleanor?" Her voice was strained. "Vanessa just called me, very upset. She said you're selling their house without warning." "That can't be right." "It's my house, Catherine," I replied calmly. "And they received formal notification yesterday." "But they've made it their home. They've invested so much in renovations." "Unauthorized renovations to a property they don't own." Silence stretched between us, decades of friendship suddenly thin as tissue paper. "Eleanor, are you sure you're thinking clearly?" Catherine finally asked. "Vanessa says you've been confused lately, forgetting conversations." Ice formed around my heart. So that was their strategy. Paint the widow as senile, incompetent to manage her affairs. "I've never been more clear-headed," I replied. "Perhaps you should ask your daughter about the credit cards opened in my name, or the $65,000 missing from my accounts." This time, the silence had a different quality. "I need to go," Catherine said finally. I'll call you later." I hung up and stared at my half-finished watercolor, blue bleeding into purple, creating something entirely new at the edges. The first post appeared on a family support forum. "Worried about elderly mother-in-law being manipulated by unscrupulous advisors. How can we protect her assets from people taking advantage of her confusion?" Catherine forwarded it to me with a simple message. "Is this what I think it is?" It was Vanessa's opening salvo, carefully worded to avoid defamation, yet specific enough that anyone who knew us would recognize the situation from her distorted perspective. More posts followed on various platforms. In Vanessa's narrative, I was a confused elderly woman being coerced by financial vultures into selling property out from under my loving family. Michael was portrayed as the devoted son trying to protect his vulnerable mother while respecting her independence. The comments were predictably sympathetic to Vanessa's version. "You might need to consider guardianship proceedings and document her confusion for the courts." I showed the posts to Mr. Goldstein, who merely raised an eyebrow. "Predictable and inadvisable," he commented. "She's creating a digital paper trail of her intentions." On Thursday evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Catherine stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable. "May I come in? I think we need to talk." I led her to the living room, where we'd shared countless cups of tea over 5 decades of friendship. Today, I offered nothing. "Vanessa and Michael had a meeting with Dr. Sutton yesterday," she began, without preamble. "The geriatric specialist?" She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "They're exploring options for evaluating your capacity to manage your financial affairs." Though I'd suspected as much from the online posts, hearing it confirmed sent a chill through me. "I see," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "And what do you think about that, Catherine?" She looked up then, her expression troubled. "I don't know what to think anymore. Vanessa says you've been acting erratically, forgetting conversations, making accusations, but you seem perfectly fine to me right now." "Perhaps because I am fine," I replied. "Perhaps because the only thing that's changed is that I've stopped allowing them to take advantage of me." I offered Catherine the folder Mr. Reynolds had prepared, a timeline of the financial fraud with supporting documentation. She hesitated before taking it. "I can't believe Vanessa would do something like this," she whispered, though her tone lacked conviction. Neither could I, at first. I watched her flip through bank statements, credit reports, the forged property transfer documents. But the evidence is quite clear. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "There must be some explanation." "I'm sure Michael and Vanessa will have several," I said. "The question is whether you'll believe them or your own eyes." After she left, I stood at the window watching her drive away. Our friendship hung in the balance now. Catherine had always made excuses for Vanessa's behavior, from childhood tantrums to adult manipulations. Would evidence finally open her eyes? The next day, Richard called with news that a potential buyer wanted to view the property. "They're only in town for the weekend. Is there any way to arrange a showing?" According to Mr. Goldstein, I was required to give Michael and Vanessa reasonable notice for showings. I called immediately. Michael answered, his voice tight. A showing? Mom, we're in the middle of renovations. The renovations you didn't have permission to undertake, I reminded him. The buyers are only available tomorrow at 11. This is ridiculous. We can't just leave on your schedule. Vanessa has a brunch planned. The notification will be delivered formally this afternoon, I said, keeping my voice even. I do hope you'll make the property presentable. That night, I received a text from Catherine. We need to talk again. Tomorrow after your house showing? So she'd heard about it already. The lines of communication between mother and daughter remained open, despite what she'd seen in my documentation. I replied with a simple yes, and tried to quiet the voice in my head that whispered I was about to lose my oldest friend, along with my only child. They've offered 15% above asking, Richard said, his voice crackling through my phone's speaker. With one condition, occupancy within 60 days. 2 months had passed since the first showing. 3 serious buyers had toured the property, each time with Michael and Vanessa making the experience as uncomfortable as possible, pointing out structural problems that didn't exist, mentioning neighborhood crime that never happened, leaving personal items strewn about to create an impression of permanent occupancy. Despite their efforts, the Colonial's elegant bones and historic pedigree had attracted a retired couple from Chicago, art collectors who saw past the half-finished modern renovations to the home's true potential. It's an excellent offer in this market, Richard continued. Shall I accept? I glanced at the calendar on my kitchen wall. 60 days would mean Michael and Vanessa would need to vacate by mid-August. Summer heat, moving trucks, the indignity of being forced out. I imagined Vanessa's fury, Michael's resentment. Accept it, I said decisively. Have Mr. Goldstein prepare the formal notice for the current occupants. As I hung up, my house phone rang. The specialist investigators had installed with a new, unlisted number. Mrs. Wilson? This is Rose Martinez. I used to work as your husband's assistant at the firm. The name triggered an immediate memory. A competent young woman who had organized Harold's chaotic office with military precision. Of course, Rose. How are you? I'm fine, but I'm calling about you. I saw some concerning posts online that seemed to reference your situation. Her voice dropped. I recognized your daughter-in-law's name. Vanessa Taylor, right? Yes, I confirmed, curious where this was leading. Mrs. Wilson, I don't know if you remember, but before I worked for Mr. Wilson, I was at Brighton Bank. I recognized Ms. Taylor because, well, there was an incident. My hands tightened around the phone as Rose explained. Years ago, while working at the bank, Vanessa had been investigated for financial misconduct involving an elderly client. The case had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but Rose remembered it clearly because Harold had been involved, offering pro bono legal counsel to the alleged victim. After I came to work for your husband, I realized he kept a file on Miss Taylor. He never mentioned why, but he updated it periodically. A file? I echoed, mind racing. Do you know what happened to it after he died? That's why I'm calling. When I saw those posts, I checked my personal records. I kept copies of certain sensitive files when the firm closed after Mr. Wilson's death. Standard procedure for legal assistance. I have the Taylor file. Within hours, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to my door. Inside was Harold's distinctive handwriting on manila folders, organized with his typical thoroughness. Taylor V. Potential financial elder abuse, monitor. Harold had compiled a detailed history of Vanessa's employment at 3 different financial institutions, each stint ending under murky circumstances. Though never charged, she had been the subject of internal investigations at each workplace, always involving elderly clients with substantial assets. Most chilling was Harold's personal note, dated 2 months before his death. Catherine's friendship with Eleanor complicates matters. However, should VT ever become involved with the Wilson family finances, this file should be immediately provided to authorities. My hands shook as I read his warning from beyond the grave. Harold had seen what I hadn't: the pattern, the risk, the predatory nature behind Vanessa's carefully cultivated charm. He'd tried to protect me even after he was gone. I immediately called Mr. Goldstein to incorporate this new information into our strategy. His response was measured but optimistic. This establishes a pattern of behavior that strengthens our position considerably. That evening, as I worked on my latest watercolor, a sunset over the ocean that my instructor had praised, my phone lit up with a text from Catherine. Need to talk. It's important. Can I come over tomorrow? There's something you should know. I stared at those words for a long time, wondering what Catherine had discovered, what she now believed, whether our 50-year friendship could survive the truth about her daughter. "Come at 2, I finally replied, setting down my brush and watching as the sun in my painting bled into the water, creating a horizon both beautiful and uncertain. I arranged 4 folders on the coffee table, each labeled in my neat principal's handwriting: financial fraud, property documentation, Harold's file, and sale contract. They formed a squared testimony to betrayal and resolution. The story of the past 2 years laid bare in documented evidence. The doorbell rang precisely at 3. I opened it to find not only Catherine, as expected, but Michael and Vanessa as well. "They were at my house when you texted," Catherine explained, looking uncomfortable. I thought it might be better to address everything together. The tension was palpable as I led them to the living room. Catherine's expression was troubled. Michael looked pale, and Vanessa wore the tight smile I'd come to recognize as her battle face. "Mom, what's going on?" Michael asked as they sat across from me. "Catherine says you have something to discuss with all of us." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I believe Catherine had something to discuss with me first." Catherine straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I've been doing some investigating since our last conversation." She glanced at Vanessa, whose smile had vanished. "I found some inconsistencies in what I've been told." "Mother, we already discussed this," Vanessa interrupted. "Eleanor is confused about many things lately. That's why we're concerned." I remained silent, watching the dynamic between mother and daughter. Something had shifted. Catherine no longer nodded along with Vanessa's assertions. "I spoke with Diane Miller yesterday," Catherine continued, addressing me directly. "You remember my cousin who works at First National? She helped me understand some banking procedures that didn't make sense in your documents." Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We came here because Catherine said you wanted to discuss the house situation reasonably, not to be ambushed with more false accusations." I finally spoke, my voice steady. "Please sit down, Vanessa. No one has accused you of anything yet." The "yet" hung in the air between us. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, be reasonable," he pleaded. "We've invested thousands in renovating the Colonial. You can't just sell it out from under us." "Invested thousands you claimed not to have when I offered you the house," I observed. "Curious, isn't it?" I opened the first folder and placed a bank statement before them. "This shows withdrawals from my accounts totaling $65,000 over 18 months, withdrawals that coincide precisely with your visits to my home." Michael blanched. That's not possible." "The second folder contains a property transfer document with my forged signature," I continued, opening it. "A document you asked me to sign, Michael, claiming it was for insurance purposes." "I never," he began, then stopped, looking at Vanessa. I opened the third folder, removing Harold's file. And this is perhaps the most interesting. My late husband kept detailed records of Vanessa's history of financial misconduct at 3 different banks, all involving elderly clients. Vanessa lunged for the file, but Catherine caught her arm. "Stop it. Just stop, Vanessa. You're believing this senile old woman over your own daughter?" Vanessa hissed. "What I believe," Catherine replied evenly, "is the evidence I've seen with my own eyes, the pattern I've ignored for too long." The room fell silent as Catherine turned to me, tears in her eyes. "After our last conversation, I contacted Vanessa's former employers. They couldn't tell me much, confidentiality agreements, but their silence was telling. Then I found records of payments from our family account to 3 different people over the years. Settlements, Eleanor. My husband and I paid to keep Vanessa's indiscretions quiet." Vanessa's face contorted with rage. "You had no right to dig through Dad's financial records." "I had every right," Catherine replied. "They're my records, too." I opened the final folder and placed the sale contract on the table. "The Colonial has been sold. The new owners take possession in 60 days. "You can't do that," Vanessa shrieked. "We'll fight this in court. We'll have you declared incompetent." "With what evidence?" I asked quietly. "The testimonial of a woman with a documented history of financial elder abuse? Or perhaps my confused son, who can't explain how renovations were funded or why his signature appears on credit card applications in my name?" Michael stared at the documents spread before him, the color draining from his face. "I didn't know," he whispered, looking up at me with the eyes of the little boy I once knew. "Mom, I swear, I didn't know about the accounts." For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across Vanessa's perfect facade. "Perhaps not all of it," I acknowledged. But you knew enough. Michael, you chose to look away rather than stand up for your mother. You chose comfort over integrity. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times, marking the hour and the end of deception. In the silence that followed, I saw my son clearly for the first time in years, not the idealized image I'd clung to, but the flawed man who had failed both of us. What happens now? Catherine finally asked. Now, I said, gathering the folders, we each make our choices. The legal document before me was straightforward. In exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal charges, Vanessa would relinquish any claim to my property and assets, acknowledge the unauthorized use of my identity, and agree to no further contact. It's a generous offer, Mr. Goldstein observed. More generous than I would advise, frankly. I'm not interested in seeing my son's wife in prison, I replied. I just want this chapter closed. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation in my living room. 3 weeks of careful negotiations through attorneys, of long conversations with Catherine as we rebuilt our friendship on honesty rather than loyalty, of silence from Michael. The day after our confrontation, he had moved out of the Colonial into a small apartment downtown. His divorce filing made the local papers, a minor scandal in our social circle, but nothing compared to what would have happened had I pressed charges. I signed my name to the agreement, watching as Mr. Goldstein's assistant notarized it. The action was anticlimactic after months of drama, yet I felt an unexpected lightness as I set down the pen. It's done, Mr. Goldstein confirmed. Ms. Taylor's attorney has her signature already. This resolves all outstanding issues between you, except, of course, the most significant one, my relationship with my son. That evening, Catherine came for dinner, our first attempt at normalcy after the upheaval. Vanessa's moving to Arizona next week, she said, helping me clear the dishes afterward. My sister is letting her stay while she figures things out. How are you handling it? I asked, genuinely concerned for my friend. Catherine sighed, leaning against the counter. Some days are harder than others. I keep asking myself how I missed the signs, how I enabled her behavior for so long. We see what we want to see in our children, I replied, thinking of Michael. Have you heard from him? I shook my head. Not since he moved out. He will, Catherine assured me, when he's ready to face what happened. The next morning, I attended a meeting of the financial literacy group Patricia had encouraged me to join. Seniors who had experienced financial exploitation sharing their stories and resources. The facilitator, a retired banker named Thomas, had invited me to speak about my experience. Standing before the group of 15 elderly men and women, some still visibly shaken by their ordeals, I felt a surge of purpose. My name is Eleanor, I began, and until recently, I believed that being kind meant being passive, that loving my family meant accepting whatever treatment I received. Nodding heads encouraged me to continue. My late husband once told me that integrity is not just about honesty, but about wholeness, being fully yourself without compromising your values. It took me 79 years and a devastating betrayal to understand what he meant. For the next hour, I shared my story, not just the fraud and manipulation, but the emotional journey from confusion to clarity, from hurt to action. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before an elderly man spoke up. How did you find the courage to confront your own son? The question pierced me. I realized that by allowing his behavior to continue, I wasn't helping him. True love means holding people accountable, not enabling their worst instincts. As the meeting dispersed, several members lingered to share their stories with me privately. I exchanged phone numbers, promised to return next week, felt the first threads of a new community forming around shared experience and recovery. That afternoon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Michael stood on the porch, his face gaunt, eyes red-rimmed. "Mom," he said simply, his voice breaking on that single syllable. I stepped back to let him in, noticing how he had aged in just 3 weeks, his shoulders hunched, new lines around his mouth. In the living room, he perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped between his knees like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "I don't even know where to begin," he said finally. "To say I'm sorry seems inadequate." "It is," I agreed, not unkindly. "But it's a start. I've been seeing a therapist," he continued, "trying to understand how I let things go so far, why I didn't see what Vanessa was doing, why I didn't protect you. And what have you learned?" He looked up, meeting my eyes fully for the first time. That I've spent my life looking for someone to take care of me the way you did. That I mistook control for love. That I was so afraid of disappointing you that I couldn't face any failure, even when the alternative was betraying everything you taught me. His honesty was unexpected, disarming. I forgive you, Michael, I said quietly. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. You're slipping. I know. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I couldn't let another day pass without telling you how sorry I am, how ashamed. As he rose to leave, I remained seated, watching my only child walk toward the door. Michael, I called. He turned, hope flickering across his face. We need time. It wasn't everything he wanted. It wasn't everything I wanted either. But it was honest, and for now, that would have to be enough. The garden bloomed with late summer roses, their fragrance mingling with freshly cut grass, and the lemon tarts Patricia had brought for the fundraiser. Canvas awnings provided shade for the 80 guests scattered across my backyard, each wearing a name tag and carrying a program for the first annual Secure Seniors benefit. 3 years had transformed the small support group I'd joined into a recognized regional organization that provided education, resources, and advocacy for elderly victims of financial exploitation. Today's event would fund our newest initiative, a peer counseling program for seniors rebuilding their lives after abuse. Eleanor, the press is here, Catherine called, waving me toward the garden gate where a local reporter waited with a photographer. At 82, I moved more slowly than before, but my mind remained sharp, my purpose clear. The reporter was young, earnest, taking notes as I explained our organization's mission and the prevalence of elder financial abuse. What would you say to seniors who are afraid to speak up about exploitation by family members? She asked. I would tell them that true family honors your boundaries, not exploits them, I replied, and that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. As the interview concluded, I scanned the crowd, nodding at familiar faces, Thomas from the original support group, now our treasurer, Patricia, who had helped draft legislation strengthening penalties for elder fraud, Mr. Reynolds, whose accounting firm now offered free consultations to seniors, and Catherine, who had channeled her guilt over Vanessa into tireless work for our cause. I didn't immediately notice the man who slipped in through the side gate, hesitating at the edge of the gathering. It was Patricia who spotted him first, touching my arm and nodding in his direction. Michael stood alone, thinner than I remembered, his hair now completely gray. In his hands was something small and rectangular, a book bound in familiar brown leather. I didn't know if I should come, he said as I approached. Your invitation said it was open to the public, but I'm glad you're here, I said, meaning it. The past 3 years had been a slow, deliberate rebuilding. Monthly lunches had progressed to weekly phone calls. Michael had continued therapy, confronting the patterns that had made him vulnerable to Vanessa's manipulation. I had learned to love him with clearer eyes, without the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded our relationship for so long. I found this, he said, holding out the leather-bound book. Among Vanessa's things in a box she never retrieved after the divorce. I recognized it immediately. Harold's journal, the one that had gone missing after his death. She took it, Michael explained, his voice tight with old anger. When we were going through Dad's office after the funeral, she was afraid it might contain information about her. My fingers trembled slightly as I accepted the journal, feeling Harold's presence in the worn leather cover, the precise gold initials embossed in the corner. There's something else, Michael continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. Inside the journal, letters, from Dad to both of us. They were supposed to be read after his death. Letters that Vanessa had stolen, fearing what they might reveal. Words from Harold that had been silenced for 15 years. I haven't read yours, Michael assured me. But mine, his voice broke slightly. He knew, Mom. Somehow he knew I would struggle after he was gone. He warned me to value integrity over comfort, to remember that true wealth isn't measured in possessions. A lesson Michael had learned the hardest way possible. Around us, the fundraiser continued. Strangers and friends united by common purpose, the organization that had grown from my personal pain, now helping dozens of seniors reclaim their lives. Would you like some lemonade? I asked, nodding toward the refreshment table. Patricia brought those lemon squares you always liked. It was a small invitation, insignificant compared to the breach that had separated us. Yet as Michael nodded and fell into step beside me, It felt like the closing of a circle. We joined a table where Catherine sat with Thomas and his wife. Introductions were made, conversation flowed. Michael listened intently as Thomas described our latest initiative, offering suggestions from his experience as a project manager. "You should come to our next planning meeting," Catherine suggested. "We could use someone with your organizational skills." Michael glanced at me, questioning. "It's a good idea," I agreed, "if you're interested." As afternoon faded toward evening and guests began to depart, I found myself alone on the patio with Harold's journal in my lap. The letter Michael had given me remained unopened beside it. The garden was quiet now, just the distant sounds of cleanup crews and Patricia directing volunteers. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding pages in Harold's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "if you're reading this, I am gone, but my love for you remains. My greatest wish is that you and Michael will honor what truly matters, not the houses or investments we've accumulated, but the integrity with which you live." Tears blurred the words, but I continued reading Harold's final guidance, his hopes for us, his faith in my strength. In the final paragraph, he wrote, "Remember that it's never too late to begin again, to stand firmly in your truth, to create a life that reflects your values rather than others' expectations." I closed the letter as the setting sun cast long shadows across the garden. Harold had been right, as he so often was. It wasn't too late. Not at 79 when I'd finally stood up for myself, not at 82 as I helped others do the same. "Mom?" Michael appeared at the patio door. "Need any help with these last tables?" "That would be nice," I said, tucking the letter into the journal and rising to stand beside my son. As we worked together in companionable silence, I thought about the long journey that had brought us here, the betrayal and pain, yes, but also the clarity and purpose that had emerged from it. I thought about the colonial house, now lovingly restored by its new owners who had reinstalled vintage stained glass windows similar to the originals. I thought about Vanessa, who according to Catherine was working at a resort in Arizona, still searching for shortcuts to security. Mostly, I thought about the words I now shared with every senior who came to our organization looking for help. Life is too long to carry resentment, and too short to waste on people who don't recognize your worth. It had taken me 82 years to fully understand that truth. But as Harold would say, better late than never. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.